Please consider becoming a patron of MythVision Podcast. You'll get early access to every video, including this amazing one, and you can ask me personal questions, private message me, anything you'd like.
Professor Elaine Pagels, I have another question. What are the actual origins of Gnosticism? This question goes into something more specific because in your book you mentioned some scholars say it comes from Zoroastrianism. Some scholars say it has Persian influence, while other scholars say it has a Babylonian origin, if you will. But there is the Jewish Gnosticism, and it seems that some forms of Gnosticism predate first century ideas, predate what we find in the New Testament. The question, and I guess you can maybe give us some of the scholarly ideas of your own conclusions, where you think it comes from, these ideas, and then delve into maybe the Jewish Gnosticism and how that married itself to a Jesus movement.
Yes, you're right that many people have thought there could be many points of origin. And, you know, religious traditions get mixed and combined throughout the world and the ancient world. But Gnosis is not a separate doctrine. Gnosis is a word that it's translated knowledge, but it doesn't really mean mental knowledge. Because in Greek you have two words for knowledge. You know, one means mental knowledge, like, do you know mathematics? Do you know physics? Do you know about geography? That's mental knowledge. The other kind of knowledge is, do you know that person? Do you know who you are? That is heart knowledge. And that is the knowledge of connection. It's more like the word we get, recognition. So the knowledge of Gnosis is heart knowledge. It's insight. Now you talk about what precedes the Hebrew Bible. Jesus was steeped in what precedes, what precedes the New Testament. Jesus was steeped in what precedes the New Testament. That's the Hebrew Bible. And the prophet, for example, the prophet Ezekiel, said that he at a certain moment had an extraordinary experience. And he was taken out of himself. He didn't know if he was even in his own body, but he was sort of lifted up in a visionary state, and he saw the Lord. But he said it wasn't like he saw a person. He said, I saw a throne, and I saw lightning and fire and jewels and shining crystal and radiance. I saw what you call in Greek, Hebrew, in Greek it's called glory, which means shining. I saw light. So the only way that you could imagine seeing God in the Hebrew Bible is light, the energy of the universe that brought it all forth. And that's probably a kind of source of the teaching of Jesus, because after all, Jesus was Jewish teacher, and he may have known mystical Jewish teaching, which talks about how the entire universe is created out of divine energy, manifest in physical form. But when you go deeper into it, just the way a physicist will go into the table and say, well, it's also made of molecules at another level. It's a completely non-physical being, a non-physical entity from the point of view of our ordinary experience. So Jewish mystics would say everything in the world is a form of divine light, including ourselves. And that seems to be what Jesus may have taught, because that's what the Gospel of Thomas and other sources teach, that you can find within yourself the divine energy and discover your connection with it. And that's what you need to become literally enlightened.
So this gnosis, if I can use the term,
yes,
it was not and even scholars argue that there was no Gnostics. Maybe we can address this point, because they think that, because it's not a one group, one size fits all. There's various movements of people running off the same Gnosis concepts.
But you're perfectly right not to say, well, there are these Gnostics and then they're real Christians. Rather, Gnosis is a way of perceiving the message of Christ. And it has to do with what you can know. And it's paradoxical, because at one point, one of the secret texts says, Gnosis means you want to say, what is God? Where did we come from? The answer is we cannot know, because we're limited beings. And the source from which we come forth is transcendent and unlimited. So our minds have no way of comprehending God. We don't know. The answer is we don't know. There is something we can know, and that's in the letters of Paul. We can know that whatever that source is, in him we live and move and have our being. Right? We can know that we are somehow enfolded in this divine source. And that's what's in the letters of Paul. Paul speaks about divine wisdom and secret gnosis. And it's not intellectual knowledge. It's not a bunch of ideas. It's an awareness of being connected with that kind of source. So that's gnosis. And it's not a bunch of doctrines that separate you from ordinary Christians. It's a level of spiritual awareness.
I think it's interesting. You quoted the "In Him we move, we breathe." That's from Epimenides, a Greek poet from the 7th century BC.
Yes,
Acts
that's
17.
right.
But the teaching that he has there seems to reflect Paul. I think Acts is doing a good job of trying to say this is stuff Paul would have said.
I think it works for Paul to say in him. I mean, that's what Acts, the words that he puts in the mouth of Paul.
Right.
That Paul is trying to say what that poet was striving to say, that in this divine source we live and move and we exist, even if we don't understand it conceptually. So that's gnosis. It's what we don't know, we're aware of, and then what we do know as a sense of knowledge of the heart.
So when people say Gnosticism came late, it's Johnny come lately, and all these texts that are called Gnostic texts, they come late. How would you address that?
Well, several scholars, Karen King at Harvard and Michael Williams at the University of Seattle, have shown that Gnosticism is an idea that comes into play because Christians want to displace that kind of Christian teaching from the rest and say, well, that's the wrong kind. So Gnosticism is a kind of negative term. It's a pejorative term. It's a slanderous term. Gnostic means bad and false and don't do it, you know. So, but the people who created and articulated these teachings simply thought of themselves as Christians, but as Christians who were especially blessed, not only to have received the public teaching of Jesus, but also to have received the deeper teaching that only certain disciples could have learned in the time of his lifetime.